I kind of like need to keep to do the thing so for the VOD it looks good. All right, let me get my cigarette. So, ever heard of the offspring? I've heard of the offspring. The story of the offspring? I didn't heard though. Let's react to the strange history of the offspring. If you do not know, the punk rock MBA, it's he is a YouTuber, a content creator that actually does like a lot of history about like rock bands and stuff like that, and it's really, really, really awesome. Like, let's check it out because like I really love the offspring, and I actually do not know their I do not know their history, their story, and it's a strange history. It's a strange story. So let's check it out.
At the end of the day, the Offspring, more than anybody else, were the band that really put that style on the map for millions and millions of kids back in 1994. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are here to talk about The Offspring, a band that really hasn't gotten the credit that they deserve for honestly being one of the most important bands in the entire history of punk. It's true, and you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't you say before that Pretty Fly for a White Guy is one of the worst songs ever made? And yes, I did say that, I do believe that, but it is still true. The Offspring did a lot for the culture. I kind of think about it this way. If Green Day...
Yes, the Offspring did so much for the culture because they actually made pop. Because like the Offspring is really a punk band, not a pop punk band. It sounds stupid, but like basically like pop punk and punk is kind of like there's like a small difference where like there is some identity lost within the art itself, right? When you try to do pop punk, right? Or rock punk or whatever, and they didn't lost this identity, but they became really, they offered punk that is mainstream and easily accessible and to a lot of people, and to a lot of people the Offspring was a getaway like an entry to actually rock music, which is actually really awesome. This is and for punk, and this is why they really deserve everything that they got, because like they really did a good job to make punk interesting, but they're interesting as well. And in general, like it is really a band that really offered an alternative for people that actually care, or even like people think about like when the Offspring was actually like popular, people that actually were scared of these bands, metal bands, rock bands, punk bands, who are they? Like, is this some type of like dangerous, like is this dangerous for my kid to listen to this? It sounds stupid, but like, hey, like some songs, like some bands are actually like not the best inspiration to have when you're a kid. And basically the Offspring were basically like able to make themselves like accessible enough for them to be understood, but also like they became liked by everyone because I don't know, they just did the thing, you know.
For the band that put the Bay Area style of pop punk on the map, then the Offspring were that for the Southern California sound, which 30 years later has proven to be by far the more important and influential style. And if you asked most people, including the members of the band, back in 1992 or something, if this would ever happen, they would have told you that you were crazy. So the question is, how exactly did this happen? How did they go from being just really one of 1,000 fairly obscure Southern California punk bands to selling over 15 million albums? And more importantly, what is their lasting influence, legacy, and impact? And also, why haven't they really gotten the credit that they deserve? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. And also, I want to thank One Rep for sponsoring this video. OneRep is a platform that removes people's private records from over 100 people search sites and Google, which is important because what you may not realize is that people search sites like White Pages, My Life, and so forth expose your home address, phone number, information from your legal and property records, and a lot of other really sensitive data. And scammers can use that to do all kinds of things like open credit cards and accounts in your name, file fraudulent tax returns on your behalf, and so forth. This happened to one of my business partners, and trust me, it is an absolutely awful, nightmarish experience. Those data brokers also sometimes publish inaccurate information. So for example, someone does a background check on you and someone else's criminal record shows up associated with you. So if you want to help protect yourself against all that, you can do it with a subscription to OneRep. You'll strengthen your privacy and safety, dramatically reduce the risk of falling victim to identity theft and imposter scams, cut down on spam, and just get general peace of mind. Sign up with OneRep right now and get 60% off a 1-year plan with an exclusive offer for the viewers of my channel. Just go to the link in the description of this video. We are talking only $5.85 per month if you choose to protect yourself, and $11.95 a month if you sign up your whole family. And OneRep is backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you even have a trial period to see if it's right for you. So in order to answer those questions, let me start at the beginning, because the Offspring have actually been around for almost 40 years now, believe it or not. They started out way back in 1984 under the name Manic Subsidal. Not really sure what they were thinking of that one. Definitely not the world's best name. And they probably had the same thought because they changed their name in 1986 to The Offspring and put out their first album in 1989 on a label called Nemesis Records, which was really just like a small punk hardcore kind of label from Orange County that most people probably know for putting out bands like Chorus of Disapproval and Instead.
Like I'm slipping away, I can't hold on. Find that path alone. Just rush me away.
And although they don't really get a lot of credit for it now, the band was most definitely a part of the DIY punk scene of that era. Like if you look, there are some absolutely wild flyers from back then for shows they played with bands like Final Conflict and Infest, Agnostic Front, and Fugazi. My favorite one is Neurosis and Chumbawamba at Gilman Street, and the next day it's The Offspring. But the first time I remember seeing their name was around 1992 when they signed to Epitaph and put out their second album, Ignition. Epitaph was a much smaller label back then than it is now, but they still did a lot more to market their releases than just about any other punk label. So I remember seeing a lot of ads and reviews and stuff for this album in kind of the underground press sort of circuit. But still, it really didn't catch on beyond kind of their core fan base, so I think absolutely nobody was expecting what was about to happen. The band went from being essentially unknown outside of Southern California to being literally on top of the charts almost overnight in 1994 with the release of their third album, Smash, and specifically the song Come Out and Play, which went to #1 on Billboard, and I would say is still my favorite song by The Offspring. And they proved that they were more than one-hit wonder by following that up with Self-Esteem, which went to #4 on Billboard, and then Gotta Get Away, which went to #6. 3 back-to-back top 10 singles on one album. They were officially a mainstream success at this point. And before I go on, I really want to dive deep and give some context on this album and exactly why it was so important, because I think maybe people kind of sort of know this, but I've never really heard anybody talk about it. First of all, in hindsight, obviously Green Day ended up being the biggest band of that like mid-90s punk.
Yeah, but the difference is that like Green Day is pop punk, while Offspring kept the identity of punk. It is within the details, and it's really like if you're really into this, into music identity through visual, personal, like lifestyles, like fashion, but also messaging and how the music sounds itself. This is kind of the difference. Doesn't mean that Green Day is bad or in any way. It just means that like the Offspring really were able to do something that not a lot of bands were able to, which is actually become popular while keeping this punk identity untouched.
Punk explosion, but in 1994 or 95, that was definitely not clear. At that time, I would say it was kind of like a three-way tie between Green Day, The Offspring, and Rancid. And actually, of the three, The Offspring had charted the highest by a good margin. And although, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't any sort of rivalry or anything like that between those bands, in a sense, it really was kind of a showdown between the two big styles of pop punk at the time. On the one hand, you had Green Day and Rancid representing the Bay Area Lookout Records kind of style that was centered.
Green Day and Offspring feel so far away from each other. Like it's funny that like so it's more that like The Offspring is a band that is active for so long that Green Day got the time to become Green Day, right? Well, like it's just like kind of surprised me that like Green Day and Offspring were like, but like yeah, no, both good bands.
Around the venue 924 Gilman Street with bands like Crimp Shrine, 15, Cringer, and Jawbreaker. And on the other hand, the Offspring sort of unofficially representing the Southern California sound, with the notable bands being Bad Religion, NoFX, Pennywise, Lagwagon, and so forth. And you may be saying to yourself, oh, that's interesting. Like, why have I never heard of these bands Crimp Shrine and 15? And that is exactly my point. At the time, the Bay Area scene was considered to be more credible and closer to quote unquote real punk by the, punk establishment, whoever the people are that decide those sort of things at zines like Maximum Rock and Roll. But 30 years later, it's very clear that the Southern California style has really had more staying power and is a lot more relevant and popular. And obviously, Bad Religion played a big role there as well, but really, at the end of the day, the Offspring, more than anybody else, were the
Yeah, and for example, Bad Religion is exactly the type of band that is also like awesome band, like, but that wasn't able to actually become like attractive or like accessible to the majority, to the mainstream. Just to give you this example so you kind of like understand what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to be a purist in any way or like an elitist about like this is punk, this is pop punk, this is not punk, No, it's just that like it's a question of identity and it's a question of career choices, basically career choices and artistic choices that led them to become like to have different status within like the art industry
and that really put that style,
the music industry, I mean,
on the map for millions and millions of kids back in 1994. And aside from just the impact of the Offspring themselves, the success of this album really made it possible for a whole generation of bands to succeed by changing the trajectory of Epitaph Records forever. For anybody who may not be familiar, just as a quick refresher, Epitaph was started by Brett Gurewitz, the guitarist and founder of Bad Religion, originally just to put out their albums and then kind of grew into a label that was bigger than that. And although it was certainly successful for a punk label of the early 90s, it was hardly like a big operation. They sold something like 25,000 copies of the previous Offspring album, which by today's standards would be pretty good, but back in the early 90s when people still bought physical media, that was not a lot of records. And so neither the label or the band really expected much more than that from this album. I think this interview with Dexter from 1994 really kind of sums it up. The possibility of us getting played on the radio or anything like that was pretty much non-existent, especially because this kind of music is not generally considered acceptable by the mainstream. So for something like this to happen, it really took us by surprise. Because keep in mind, at this point, there's really no evidence that punk was viable in the mainstream because this was still before Green Day had blown up, and the Offspring were still essentially a part-time band. Like, Noodles still had his job as a janitor at a high school in Anaheim. But still, after kind of taking off locally and then getting picked up on the radio all over the country, it ended up being a gigantic success. It sold over 6 million albums, and as far as I know, still stands as the best-selling indie release of all time. And with the money Epitaph made from that album, it enabled them to take chances on a lot of smaller artists like the Voodoo Glow Skulls and Agnostic Front. They put out a Tom Waits record. All these artists who they believed in creatively or for being part of the scene, but clearly nobody thought they were going to sell millions of albums. But they could do that because of the money that they had coming in from Smash. It also helped independent record stores survive. I think Brett Gurewitz put it really well. He said that this album raised the sea level for the whole punk community. Even if you think that the Offspring were shitty poser stuff for kids who shop at the mall, this album was still the entry point for millions and millions of kids to eventually get into quote unquote real punk.
Yeah, this is kind of like the mentality that like we as like artists and or fans, we have to kind of like go with like this idea of being a sellout, being a poser, being like a no, everything is art is art, and actually Offspring is like the least the least example that like you can use to actually like try to talk about like being doing commercial music. These people, they actually like, you can see that they have fun, you can see that they are awesome, and you can see that like they do something really special, you know.
Like, how many kids heard Come Out and Play and then got into NoFX and Strung Out, and then maybe they checked out Crass and Black Flag or whatever? Or maybe they saw that the Offspring covered bands like The Digits, or later on they did a song with Jello Biafra. Personally, I can't really say that I'm a huge fan of their music, but I can definitely recognize what they did for the scene by helping so many people get into punk. With that said, as usual, the punk scene had to find a way to view somebody else's success as a negative.
It is always they're sellouts, and then the story goes by like this: they're sellouts. They're not real. They're actually like they're not for real. And then actually the band is proof that they're for real. And then people are like, actually we're wrong. They're for real. Let's forget about it. And basically this is the story of like many bands. It's as stupid as that. Like the animosity in the music industry is basically a lot of this, like they're not for real, these people. And then the artists, it's actually no, because like there are like some sellouts, and this criticism is actually true. Like some people, like imagine you're doing as you're investing like your time and energy to actually leave a legacy within like a style genre that has a history, right? So people that like just come in and kind of like feel you feel that like they're not respecting of the roots of this style of music, I can understand. But because like the rock scene is really like a bunch of like just like really wholesome awesome people, basically it happens again and again, and each time it's like, are they for real, these people? Because it will be sad if it's not, if they're just a bunch of sellouts. And a lot of the times like it goes like this: well, they keep working, they keep selling albums, they keep like do touring, they do lives, they do feats, and then people are like, yeah, they're for real. And then they get accepted into like the within like they get accepted, and they don't like get this victimized of criticism.
Of course, along with Green Day and Rancid, they were added to the list of bands that real punks had to hate. And I remember the legendary 80s Southern California punk band Agent Orange in particular got really upset because they felt like that one surf guitar kind of part from Come Out and Play was a little too similar to their song from 1981 called Bloodstains. Which I personally thought was kind of stupid, because as the Vandals pointed out in their song about it called Aging Orange, that's really just the Phrygian scale.
So after much thought and a panel of experts, I came up with a brilliant little plan. I'll take out my frustration.
Yeah, you can imagine like these people are like, are you copying me? Is just like, but at the same time, like it's you have to understand like the music industry is such a poor industry, like and usually like people that are successful in it, not everyone is successful like with 17 albums and that are like multi-platinum with multi-platinum CDs, you know, and recognition of like the world recognition, you know. And so people that like and sometimes like there's a lot of cases where actually like artists just kind of like rip off like formulas, like songs that like were popular, are popular in some ways, and just like tinker them, so change them a little bit. in some ways, and they get a hit sometimes. And this is kind of like the part where it's like, are you for real? Because like to be honest, like sometimes it can be a homage, you know, a tribute, like a way to be like, yeah, this song is awesome, we wanted to, like the artist is like, yeah, we wanted to actually like offer like kind of like a proof of respect, you know, like something like this. It's not that complicated once you get into it. It's just like a bunch of people that like you just have to understand, like there's a lot of it's a lot of about like respect and actually like well, credibility, and also like gaining and reputation. And basically like each time there's a lot of bands like start off from nothing, and they actually have to build their reputation. I'll give you another example, like within the music industry, a lot of artists need to build a reputation as good workers, as good colleagues, because like basically like if you want to do touring is actually quite visceral when it comes to, it's quite violent when it comes to like working like work conditions. And basically like there are some artists that like really do act as divas, right? And some artists that actually like really just like do the stuff, and basically like doing music is a lot closer to your dead-end job. So delivery, fast food, or I don't know, office job than you will think, because it's basically like everything is scheduled and you have to do it on time. The only thing is that like the schedule is not like never really exactly the same. You have to travel a lot, but basically like on like the day of the show, like you have to be ready at this point, you have to be sociable. Like there's also like this part within the music industry that people don't understand, is that like you have to be like you have to be like basically like someone nice to be around, because like if you're not someone nice to be around, you're not someone nice to work with. And you know, like all these songs, especially in rock and metal, they sing about like drugs and alcohol and like getting fucked up, having a messed up life. Well, a lot of people, they do that. And do you know what how difficult it is to actually like work with like people that are like drug addicts? Well, it is not the simplest thing, and usually like it can happen. And like it happened that like some bands, they actually like got the chance to actually do touring, become like popular, and basically like they never got a second chance because they were like too complicated to work with. And not because their music was bad, and not because like they were bad people. It's just because like just because they were complicated to work with, or like just like mean, like disrespectful to the people within the industry. It can happen, like, and it has nothing to do with music.
But could you really expect anything else from boomer punks? In any case, regardless of whether you like this album or not, the point that I am making here is that this album was a big deal for punk. Every bit as big as Dookie. Which brings us to their next album, Ixnay on the Hombre from 1997, which put them in the...
I love the fact that like the Offspring, they really have this vibe, the Mexicano vibe, canal. They really have like kind of like this California, but like really Latino, with like a touch of Latino, you know, like within their music. And I really like that. It's really unique. It's really like people don't really think too much about it, but like there's a lot of like Mexicana like type of like homage, like type of like love that they just like sing about.
Kind of difficult position of having to follow up on this giant mainstream success. Everyone was wondering, could they keep the momentum going, or was that one album really all they had in them? Were they just kind of in the right place at the right time? And as history will now show, they answered that question with this album, which was kind of complicated by the fact that they left Epitaph over disputes with Brett Gurewitz. They ended up signing to Columbia Records. But in spite of all that, the album went to number 9 on Billboard, and the single Gone Away was another mainstream hit.
Hey!
feels like I am far
Maybe
away.
not quite as big as Come Out and Play or Low Self-Esteem, but still a big song, and the album did go platinum and showed that they had staying power and that they were more than just a punk band. Like, I would consider Gone Away to be more of what you would call like a rock song that got picked up by a lot of radio stations that maybe wouldn't typically play a punk band. And with their continued success, they brought even more people into the scene. Which brings us to their next album, Americana, in 1998, which was arguably the peak of their mainstream relevance. Smash may be the fan favorite, but I think if you look now, it's worth noting that 3 of their top 5 most streamed songs are from this album. Which personally, I kind of question why. This album is best known for the song Pretty Fly for a White Guy, which I understand.
I used to have a band and we used to sing Pretty Fly for a White Guy. We did a couple concerts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. Yeah, I used to play that with my band back in high school.
It is an ironic song, it's a self-parody, whatever, but still, this is one of the most irritating songs of all time to me.
And all the girlies
Sorry, Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
But who really gives a shit what I think, right? Because regardless of my personal opinion, this song was a gigantic hit. It's super catchy, it was a huge song, it went to #1 in I think like 9 or 10 countries, most of them in Europe, which I think validates everything that I've ever said about Europeans and their terrible.
If you're a fan of Sum 41, like Pretty Fly for a White Guy is kind of like into deep version of The Offspring, you know? Or yeah, like I think that like it's the same vibe. If you know, you know.
Taste in music. This album was also the first time where I'd say that they really changed up their style a bit. Up until this point, they'd really continued to play pretty straightforward Southern California style pop punk that, other than better production, really didn't sound all that different from their first album. But with this one, they went, I guess you would say, a little bit more pop, added in some sort of other elements like different kinds of percussion and stuff. Personally, I think this album is a little bit more corny and cartoonish than their earlier stuff, but I can also recognize why it's their most accessible. For example, like the horns and percussion in Why Don't You Get a Job? They also got a pre-fame Zooey Deschanel in the video.
Why don't you get a job? Don't you like? It always makes me think that like it's a Christmas song. I need to point this out. I'm not into Christmas songs. And like, don't you think that like, don't you get a job? Wait, let me check. It is don't you get a job, but like I need to just like. Yeah, don't you get a job? Like it sounds like Christmas. It sounds like Christmas, right? Right? It's not just me, right? Like, because of that, like, I never really quite liked the song. Not because it's a bad song, just because it sounds like Christmas. And I'm like, I don't know. Sounds too much like Christmas for me, man. Like...
Video for She's Got Issues, dressed like she's Ramona Flowers. Very, very 90s look. They also started to do more kind of larger pop culture stuff, which I get the sense that they kind of sort of resisted a little bit before.
What was
dressed like she is a pre-fame Zooey Deschanel in Why Don't You Get a Job? They also got a pre-fame Zooey Deschanel in the video for She's Got Issues, dressed like she is.
Wait, never saw this clip.
Ramona Flowers. Very, very 90s look. They also started to do more kind of larger pop culture stuff, which I get the sense that they kind of sort of resisted a little bit before. Like, if you notice, they never did the whole late night talk show circuit that a lot of bands did, which I'm sure they had lots of offers for. For example, they were on the soundtrack to the game Crazy Taxi, which I remember playing a ton on Dreamcast until I just got absolutely sick of their song, but it was a great game. They all
This is cool as fuck. Like, there's like a couple bands that like just like participated in like some video games, and as a way to promote themselves, but as a way also like to kind of like share the love, you know. And this was the coolest thing. These days, it's not the same, you know. Like the big artists, like actually like in video games, it still happens. It still happens, but it's not the same. Like.
Also had a cameo in the movie Idle Hands, the kind of horror comedy movie with Seth Green and Jessica Alba, where Dexter gets his scalp ripped off by a disembodied hand while wearing an AFI shirt. And speaking of AFI, this is also when Nitro Records really came into its prime, which is a label founded by Dexter and Greg from The Offspring in 1994, and had bands like Rufio, Guttermouth, and Jughead's Revenge, and most notably also put out everything from AFI up to and including the All Hallows EP. Basically, all of the punk era AFI releases. And for sure, AFI was going to be big regardless of what label they were on, because they're just that good and the guys in the band are that smart. But at the same time, the fact that Nitro was able to use the Offspring's platform to give them a little bit of a boost had to help, right? For example, him wearing their shirt in Idle Hands, or the Offspring covering AFI on the soundtrack for the Jim Carrey movie Me, Myself, and Irene.
It's rage I cannot let go.
And of
Okay, what's the song?
movie Me, Myself, and Irene. Offspring covering AFI on the soundtrack for the
Oh,
Jim
it's a
Carrey
cover
movie
of
Me,
AFI.
Myself, and Irene.
It's rage I cannot let go.
And of course, as most of you know, AFI went on to be one of the most important bands of the 2000s, and themselves did a ton to help the punk and hardcore scene. So again, I think you have to kind of give the Offspring some of the credit there for facilitating that to some extent. Nitro also put out a ton of classic punk bands like TSOL, The Damned, and The Vandals. And if you look at what the label has put out, it seems pretty clear to me that their goal was never really to like make a ton of money. It was really just to put out what they thought were great bands. And the money they made and the platform that they had with the Offspring really was just a way to help facilitate that. Nitro doesn't really get a ton of credit for it, I don't think, but honestly, they were one of the best labels of the 90s. Which brings us to what I would call the end of the Offspring's most relevant era, with Conspiracy of One from 2000. This one doesn't seem to be very popular with the fandom, but if I personally had to choose one Offspring album to listen to, I think it would be this one. Because to me, it's the one that sounds the most like a typical 90s Fat Records or Epitaph band. Like some band you would see play with Good Riddance and Pulley or something. I don't know if it was a conscious decision or just kind of worked out this way, but it seemed like they dropped most of the like goofy, cartoonish kind of stuff from Americana, with the exception of the song Original Prankster, which I think of as kind of like Pretty Fly Part 2. It's honestly a really good album.
Until the break of
Time does fly, and on to one another. Time, then better.
And although the band never went away and of course continued to do well, they put out several more albums, including one that actually just came out last year that I didn't even know about until
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Like, they have like this kind of like Americana, Mexicana kind of like vibe that like he doesn't talk about, no one talks about, like no one ever like kind of like, no one cared, but like it's really because of how respectful it is. But like it's really like they have like this no Spanish, but like really Mexican type of vibe, and that they added to their song. And like no one ever like really like, even I never saw even a comment about it. Well, it's really like obvious, and I think it's because like how much they're respectful of like, and how visible it is that like they love this the Mexican culture.
I made this video. I think after this album, they were clearly past their prime, both commercially and in terms of their relevance. So I'm just kind of gonna lump all that together. And by the way, that is not a criticism. Like, it happens to literally everyone because nobody can stay at the top forever, right? So that brings us to the last question. What is their lasting impact, influence, and legacy? Well, on the one hand, I don't really hear a lot of people mention the Offspring as a direct musical influence like you do Green Day. Like, I don't hear a lot of people say, oh, the Offspring, that's the band that inspired us to start playing music. But on the other hand, with tens of millions of albums sold, like, I'm sure there are plenty of people who would say exactly that. But to me, their influence is more about what Brett from Epitaph said, that they raised the sea level for punk as a whole, along with Green Day and Rancid. Like I said, in particular for that Southern California style, which in hindsight ended up being by far the most important and influential version of punk, at least in the mainstream sense.
I think that like one other thing that like he didn't talk about is their new albums, and their new albums are like, well, I don't know, they have like a more like a different vibe, a different color to it, but it is still the Offspring, and it is still good, and it is still something really interesting to listen to, and really something really inspiring.
I think their success also paved the way for that late 90s and early 2000s pop punk explosion, the what I call TRL bands like Newfound Glory, Blink-182, and Sum 41. And I say that because if you actually take a step back, I think that both sonically and culturally, they were a lot closer to those bands than Green Day were, who really seemed like they wanted nothing to do with any of that. Like, they almost thought they were too good for it. And personally, although I don't really love their music, I've always appreciated that they seem like really humble, chill, smart guys. For example, Dexter going back to school to finish his PhD in molecular biology in 2017, which
this is such an alpha move.
obviously he didn't need to do. He's already rich and famous. It's not like he's gonna go work in the field. It's just that he seems to really love the subject and love education, and he wanted to pursue that, which I think is pretty cool. And really, in hindsight,
and I think it shows like, I think that like it shows a good example, you know, like just as an example of what can happen even after fame and money, you know.
Maybe more than any of those other 90s bands, they really never walked away from punk as a sound or a culture. And think of how many millions of kids got into punk because of them. So next time you think of bands that made a real contribution to punk, make sure that you have the Offspring on that list. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments of this video. Also, as always,
thank you so much, the Punk Rock NBA, for this video. The Punk Rock NBA, if you're into the stories, it does it for like a lot of rock bands, emo bands, like neo metal, death metal bands, like, and some more mainstream bands, like so. Yeah, you should check it out. Like, offer offer him a chance. Is a fucking legend. This guy is that good. He is that good.